audition that was pretty much set up for a white actor to do, and then really have to advocate and prove to this director, whether it be Shakespeare or something modern, a film, prove to that director that in fact a black actor can play this role. And I found myself sort of coming up against that a lot, and that sort of became my MO. If I was there, more than likely it was because I was the only black man sitting there, and somebody said, well, you know, this actor might be able to do those kinds of things. Now there's another way as well, which I also began to play with, which was, and I'll give you a specific example. Oliver Stone was auditioning for, I don't remember, one of his films, and an actor went in before me. Some of you may know him, Reggie Cathey. Reggie Cathey is this lovely, deep, very articulate sounding black actor. And Reggie went in, and Oliver reamed him. He said, why can't you black actors just sound like you're black? And he came out and he told me this. And I went in and I reamed Oliver Stone. At that point, I'd thrown the audition out the window and said, what did you say to this actor, and how dare you? And what do you know about blackness? How many black people do you know, and how many different sounds do you think the only sound that comes out of our mouth is something southern, something urban, something whatever? There are, for as many people sitting out there, as many different kinds of blackness. Well, needless to say, I didn't get the role, and Oliver Stone has never called me since. But it didn't matter, because ultimately the name of the game was someone needed to stand up and say something. So that's the other thing. The last thing was finally I used to get irritated always by, as I said, sort of the sparsity of roles for black actors. And my agents, mostly people white, would always say, well, then why don't you write something? It always pissed me off. So I would think, well, I'm an actor, I'm not a writer. Why should I have to take on responsibility of having to write something? Until, of course, the light over my head went off. It was a white light. And I realized that was yet another way of sort of advocating for blackness, which is to either get a writer or write it myself. So,
yeah, I think my response is very similar, which is to say that I think most academics, and I don't know if the academics in the room might want to chime in, they tend to be theorizing themselves, or at least they want to theorize themselves into the literature. So that's where like some of my scholarly interest in blackness came from. I've done a lot of my practical work at white institutions, and I've always been interested in creating space for students out there like me, somebody who came from a place and landed at, you know, a kind of institution where there aren't very many of them, but who also had a zest or a thirst or a hunger to make work. And so I've always been the person that's like, okay, let's figure out how we can make this thing happen, you know? And because I have been a part of so many institutions for so long, I've learned how to work institutions, and so I try to make sure that I can get that next generation the opportunities that I had, right? So like this past year at Stanford, we did the Color Purple musical, and it was an undergraduate, a black undergraduate who directed it, and an undergraduate had never directed a main stage production at the university. One, and two, the department hadn't produced a musical in 40 years. And part of the way that we were able to do that is that I walked with him to the chair, and we just put out a proposal, a 40-page proposal, because academics like a lot of language, as you can tell. A 40-page proposal as to why this was really important to the campus. And Oprah Winfrey showed that. I mean, it was one of those kinds of experiences. So
that was so in the room are students representing a cross-section of disciplines, humanities, ethnic studies, theater and performance. Do you think that it's helpful for students to do this interdisciplinary, this cross-disciplinary type of work? And why? Why is it important for a theater student to say, take African American, African studies?
Sure, sorry. So I was just talking about this gentleman here earlier who's an actor, but who's getting a degree in political science. And he was saying to me, if you don't, I mean, you can say it out loud yourself, but that the political science work actually deepens his theater work. And as somebody who got a degree in government, right, my life has taken me on all kinds of paths. And the way that you, I think, figure out if something is going to work for you is by doing it. And so at Stanford, for example, I'm teaching a class now in African American Studies. I've taught a black cinema class, a black sitcoms class, all through African American Studies. I think that all of those classes are enriched by my work, my political work, my activist work. It's enriched by my theater work. So I think that kind of interdisciplinary engagement is crucial to you becoming well-rounded individuals. And I don't know if here they what's that Jesuit saying, pura personalis? Is that a big thing? And it's really about, developing the whole person and taking care of the whole person. And I think that's what, doing that kind of interdisciplinary work allows, or what it begets.
Yeah, clearly we agree on this. The more well-rounded you are, the better actor, director, designer, or whatever it is you become. If you only know one thing, then you are, you have blinders on and that's all you can see, very narrow vision. So the wider your vision, the wider the world in terms of how you approach your work, and I think it's all beneficial. So, I had a friend years ago who was an architect, but he had been studying theology. But when he went to study architecture, it come from a theology background, and it all sort of came together. So I think all those things, any kind of cross-pollination in terms of your experience, whether it be in academia or whether it be out in the world, can do nothing but help your progress as someone who is an artist.
Yeah. So before we take questions, I just wanted to say something about what you both said about creating spaces. And it reminds me of a quote by Octavia Butler. Do you know who Octavia Butler was? She said she was reading so many things that erased her. And she said, I wanted to write myself in, right? And I just think that's such a beautiful way to think about, particularly I'm thinking of my students here at Fordham. We talk a lot about spaces that don't quite fit, labels that don't quite fit, and how we create something that defines who we are and the way that we see ourselves. So writing ourselves in, and so if we could take the time to think about that in the space as we pose questions or even comments. So I encourage the students to think, if you want to, there's something that resonated with you, I'm sure it did. If you don't feel that you have to come up with a smart question, right? If this is a space where if you want to share a story, right? If you want to testify in this space, if you want to do an interpretive dance, from this space, I'll have a list, right? So, we don't have to be traditional about this. We don't have to have the perfect question, right? We have the honor of not just having Joe and Isaiah and Darnell, of course, but everybody in this room, right? So we're all resources. So with that, I don't think I need to collect index cards, right? Not this crowd, right? So we can just we'll just field questions. If you just want to stand up and offer your question, your comment. Yeah, you?
I do.
Please. And if you can say your name,
All right.
great, that would be wonderful.
Cool. All right, everyone. My name is Damian Warren Lloyd Rochester. So, Dr. Owens is a past professor of mine. I thank her dearly. This question is for Isaiah, but Mr. Martin, please feel free, and everyone else in the room. It's in regards to blackness. What is blackness? When and if we get to discover blackness, as I agree that there is much to discover in blackness, do we then identify whiteness? Meaning, if whiteness has historically overshadowed blackness, causing it to lose its identity, then wouldn't that presuppose that what is considered as whiteness is not true whiteness, but rather a fog masking true blackness? Therefore, in discovering blackness, we will also inevitably discover whiteness. Would this then mean that whiteness cannot exist without blackness? If this is so, does blackness exist alone? Or is it whiteness that created the notion of blackness? But if whiteness traces itself to blackness to manifest itself as whiteness, then is whiteness just merely another reflection of blackness?
That's a good question. It's kind of it's a tough event.
I'm playing Professor Owens.
Invisible man.
My quick response, to that is that both blackness and whiteness are interarticulated, which means that I kind of would question the idea of true whiteness or true blackness. I don't know if one can
Exactly.
say that those things are, but I think that there's a way in which when one is talking about blackness, one is always talking about whiteness and a whole host of other kind of philosophical or theological or performative concepts, right? So that's my quick answer to that. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. I just think that the two of them are interarticulated.
I mean, don't you think one cannot exist without the other?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the sun doesn't exist without the night, right? They have to interplay. Toni Morrison talks about the fact that if you don't have blackness in a lot of these so-called white novels, those novels would fall apart, the thread would fall apart. So we exist or coexist with each other, because without each other, the world would be a completely different place. What we end up, I think, getting confused about often is the politics of black and white, which has little to do with the essence of black and white.
Right.
This is what Ellison was talking about. So that what we bring to it as individuals, right, at the end of Invisible Man, basically he says, is it something outside of me? Probably not. It's something that I bring to it that causes this problem, that it has to be love and hate and black and white, and it's both all functioning within you all at the same time. In my class, I have to teach my students about opposition, because that's how human beings work. You know, there's this word that we use called bipolar. So you think bipolar is something that makes people a little crazy. We're all bipolar. We all have two sides of us, at the very least. At the very least. And when you talk about blackness or whiteness, just look around at all the different shades of black and or white in the room, and you understand right away that they have to work with each other. You know what I mean? They have to.
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Darby Davis. I am a freshman at Fordham University. And I want to comment on something that Mr. Morris said. You mentioned choice, and it's amazing because where I come from, especially, I come from a single-parent household in a poor neighborhood. And I remember a friend told me that because we're two black men, or poor neighborhood, single parents, we're supposed to be drug dealers. Because that's what we're supposed to be. I remember telling him, I have a choice. And I don't want to be that, I want to be that. And I'm happy that you brought that up, because there are a lot of kids I know back home who could do great things, but they think because of where we are, that's what we're supposed to be, and that they don't have a choice. So I just want to thank you again for that presentation you had, and to show that we do have a choice. What people think that we're supposed to be, it's not what we can be. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
I was really struck by the title of this event, The Afterwards of Blackness, and I know that you had a very wonderful, elegant, sort of deconstructive reading of what afterwards is, and that might be also before. But I wonder if you could talk a little more about that. What are we after blackness, and if not, or what are we after? Are we after anything?
So, in talking about the afterwards, I'm not talking after, right? So it's not like a move to do the post. Part of the reason why I like the idea of afterwards, and this is just a repetition of what I said in the talk, in some ways, is that it does force us to think about both ends and futures at the same time, right? So there is a kind of bi-directional temporality implicit or embedded in the word. Does that make sense? So I don't know, I don't think that we're after anything. The only thing that I am certain of that we will be after is death, but I'm not even sure what exists after death. We all have some ideas about that. Otherwise, we're right in the middle of everything. We're experiencing everything in the present, right? The future and the past, all in the present.
But at the same time, you did start with the Black Arts Movement, right?
Yes,
Which we are obviously,
Yes.
after in some ways. So I wondered if that.
That's a good, well,
Yeah.
the question is, are we after it? Because there's a way in which
Maybe
it,
not.
like, it still kind of emerges, right? Or it resurfaces in the contemporary. It's continually surfacing in the contemporary moment. Because part of what I left out of the talk, but part of a lot of the debates or the kind of the theories of like the post actually begin with the Black Arts Movement, right? And there's a stabilizing of the movement so that people can then write against it. But in writing against it, there is a contending with it, which means that it's still very much alive in the present.
Thank you.
Christina, Dennis, we'll take you now.
Sorry, this is I think a related question. So in the way that you're conceiving of the afterwards of blackness, it seems to me that there's a very powerful resistance to Enlightenment principles like
Yes.
history, progress. But I'm wondering, or maybe I'm seeing a tension between that and the idea, of course, that we need to make progress,
Progress, right.
right? So what does progress look like when it's anti-Enlightenment? Or what way is it relating to those principles?
That's a really great question. And part of what I try to do in the project is look at the ways in which the works themselves are theorizing about temporality. And there's often a resistance to the kind of Enlightenment notion of progress, et cetera, right? Which is not to say that there isn't still some like residual attachments to it, but there's also a critiquing of it always, because we're dealing with Black body, and the Black body almost always critiques Enlightenment principles in some ways. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
It does not.
No. Let me say it again. Let me see if I can understand.
I'm just wondering what the investment is in Enlightenment principles when we still want to make progress.
I see.
How do we conceive of progress when we don't want to invest in Enlightenment principles?
But then is the question, can you invest in enlightenment
What's the
without progress?
Right, is it a non-progress progress? Is it a non-teleological progress? Is it a, am I just scatting now?
No.
It sounds like you're asking what does progress look like? What is that correct? Like,
Yeah.
What would progress be, or what is enlightenment?
Well, I think that there's a way in which we can, I think part of what I'm interested in is thinking about the ways in which we can assess progress without attaching kind of like a temporal marker to it, right? So is there a way in which we can think about progress not in a linear fashion, but in like a cyclical way, or as like a series of blips or bumps, etc.? I mean, is that possible? And I do think that there's a way, and I do think that it is possible, but it really is a philosophical conversation, precisely because our entire world is organized around teleological ideals and principles.
Isn't that the struggle, the tension between a linear time, sort of a European time, and a secular time, and the four movements of the sun and the Kamunga line, the whiteness and darkness, and there's no real progress?
Right.
My training is in opera, and I became an actor as well. And in 2006, I made my debut as Zarastro in the Magic Flute in Vienna. And I thought it was so strange because then everybody came to me and they said, you are the very first African-American person to play the role of Zarastro in Vienna. And I thought that was so strange because it was 2006 and all those new things happened to my parents, you know? Like the first of all of those things happened to the generation before. But then I kind of realized, and I thought, oh, this is progress. This is something new.
Right.
And then I remember there was one time when I was standing on the train platform, and they had those very large info screens that would say, you know, with commercials. And what was interesting, on another platform, there was an elderly Viennese man, and he just sort of looked at me, and then he stuck his tongue out at me. You know, and I sort of, I said, yeah. And I was stunned. And then right behind me in this info screen, it came up. It said, "Willkommen, Alvin Crawford as Zarastro in the Magic Flute." And he just sort of looked in the same minute, and then everything changed. And I just thought, and I looked and I saw, and you know, and then the train came, and I got on the train, and I went to rehearsal. But I thought, I was like, so was that progress? Like, I don't know. I really had no idea. And I thought, and I liked what you said about writing a place for yourself, and I thought all I can do is just go and do my job, and I don't know to celebrate this or to. I just thought it was a very strange experience. So I thought this is the comment I brought up.
Dennis, did you say something?
Yeah, I didn't mean to go off topic slightly, But hello, I'm Dennis Tyler. This is my Whitley Gilbert way. I have a question/comment for Joe Morton. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about disability in your adaptation. I was struck by the fact that G's sort of, interaction with Maurice, is it? Morris. Causes him to reflect about his own self, right? And even sort of his own choices and the issue of survival. And I thought, well, there must be something about Morris's body, right? His extraordinary body that's causing all this moment, like the moment where he's looking at himself in the subway, the bus mirror.
Yes.
Because his impulse is to, deem him as inferior, right? Call him lame or call him crippled, and yet he gives him that golden nugget. Morris gives him that golden nugget at the end about why he survives, how he survives, why he chooses to do so. And I just wondered if there's something about his disability that
Running through the entire play is an image of the yellow dog. When it sort of starts to play off of that. G and his gang go off and they kill this man for his pay packet or his wallet. And later on, one of the gang members begins to kind of tease G about his kind of weakness when it comes to dogs. And he starts saying, so when you were a puppy, did you have a puppy and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out this is a theme that runs through his life, that when he was a kid, he had a dog. The dog was about to have puppies. A terrible event happens where the dog gets killed. Later, just before this scene, after he has the baby, he starts beginning to have flashbacks of this past that he can no longer remember. And so when he sees Morris, as he says, it kind of reminds him of the yellow dog that he saw in his memory. And that's where those two things come together. Plus, I always describe that scene as the physical cripple sort of talking to the psychological cripple about their disabilities.
Yes.
I think actually Isaiah had mentioned something about academics liking words. So I actually want to talk a little bit about word choice because blackness and darkness, in my opinion, are not the same thing. And so, in the play that you referenced, actual darkness falls on, not blackness. And so can you discuss, and actually in the play that Mr. Morton, had adapted, darkness and blackness both play a role because they're going in and out of light. Darkness, you talk about the revealing of things, both psychologically and in the temporal world. So can we just talk a little bit about blackness and darkness and how those aren't the same things and they're often confused in the world? And so bringing that up into this conversation, if we can sort of diverge those and make them separate and then see how, in a non-literal way, they also play a role in the same conversation.
I guess I would throw the question back to you. And how about you? Can you lay out for us how you see them as being different? I'm not saying that I agree with you that they are different, but I'm interested in hearing your definitions.
Well, I think it's, for me, when I'm thinking literally, darkness is sort of the absence of light, right? And light is not necessarily white.
Right.
And those two, so if you say darkness and blackness are the same thing, then light and white are the same thing. And those two things aren't, in my opinion, the same thing. So if darkness falls in a room, I'm not necessarily being at one with my blackness. I kind of feel like if the play had been, there's an empty seat next to every white person and a black person comes down and they have to have like an interaction for 20 minutes, that would be interacting with blackness. And so blackness, like you said, it's evolving, it's ever changing, it's with us in the past, present, and future, and it's undefinable.
Yeah.
But at the same time, blackness is not black, or darkness is not. Darkness is easily defined. Darkness has a cause, it has, in some cases, an effect, fear, uncertainty, all those things, and they can be related literally, literarily, to blackness and the cause and what blackness causes in white people and in other black people, depending on the socioeconomic stature, all those things. So blackness can produce fear and uncertainty and all those things, but that's not darkness.
Yeah.
Well, but in the play, I'm going to guess that Pullins is using blackness and or darkness as an abstract, right? So any number of things can happen to you in the dark. I mean, you can go into what are called think tanks, right? Complete dark and come out with incredible revelations. You can go into that same think tank and come out a mad person because you can't bear the darkness. So I think that all of those things are implied in that moment. that blackness and or darkness have all kinds of effects and are never meant to be defined one way or another. And that the problem, as I said earlier, with blackness and or darkness is they become political statements. We sort of politicize what those things are, and we emblemize those things